bass.
Hey, Funketeers, Bootsy here to bring the Truth and Rhythm family's attention to Funk Not Fight. Yeah, this is a call to action. We spread hope, not hate, to gain satisfaction throughout our communities via the music uplifting unity. Peppermint Patty, tell us a little more.
Thinker is our partner. Thinker Music, that is. So please check the link that's scrolling across the bottom, click it, and submit your music.
Let's all funk, not fight.
Welcome back to the next part of this Truth and Rhythm episode. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you've already done so, please share it with friends. Also become a member by joining Truth and Rhythm on Patreon, or consider donating at funkinstuff.net. Thank you so much for your interest and support. Enjoy.
The Quincy thread also ran through with, I want to mention a couple more of those because they were important records too. The George Benson, Give Me the Night, and Heatwave, Candles. It was toward the end of Heatwave's run, but still.
Which is Rod, Rod started Heatwave with the two brothers, and, just those records, it's just hard to explain how, and I've done some podcasts too about Quincy's influence and what that was like with some of the people that were there, even trying to explain what a great producer does, because it's kind of mystical and magical. But he made everybody, it was, first of all, it was a party without being, but it was deadly serious. I mean, it was as much fun as you could have with your clothes on all the time, I'm going to say, with Quincy. Not so with some of the sessions that were sideways, but completely fun, completely inspired, completely music based, but clowning and all that. We had a thing, especially at the horn section, but just those group of session guys in general. We gave each other a lot of shit, and it was very good natured in that it wasn't meant to bully or belittle people. I don't think, it's, some of it has got a little on the edge about somebody's weakness, because you're on top of each other, breathing together. And you get to know each other very well after 12 hours in a studio with headphones on, and you're talking to each other, and then, you're fucking up together. You're also making great stuff together. And it's just what Quincy created in an atmosphere was this vibe of go for it. The most you can do, I'm here for, and just, you want to try something, anything you want to try. He was open for it. Was never looking at the clock. Even when I knew deadlines were on top of him, just never gave that vibe. It was like, and you'd look up there and Nelson Mandela may walk in, or Naomi Campbell, or just anybody, who Oprah would show up. Just, it could be anybody in the fucking whole world, not politicians. I mean, he ran in, talk about Forrest Gump, Quincy. It's just like, just a truly an amazing guy on so many levels, and nobody's ever like, well, that I got to work with. Aretha Martin had a particularly wonderful thing too that was very Quincy-like in a lot of ways, and being a master musician didn't help. It didn't hurt. Aretha was a master arranger. It's a lot of those Atlantic records.
I know Chaka Khan too. I think some with
Chaka, yeah. And that's, in fact, that's that What You Gonna Do For Me record in 81, I believe, I got a call. He probably, pretty sure Quincy told him he was looking for a keyboard player, and Quincy said, I don't know if he hired me to play horns on it, but I ended up doing all the horn arranging, all the synth parts, of course, all the Rhodes and the tracking. It was Steve Ferroni, Anthony Jackson, Hamish Stewart, Mark Stevens, Chaka's brother, and Chaka, and I had met Chaka before from the earlier Rufus records we did as a horn section, but getting to live with her in Montreux for 3 months. We went over to Montreux Studios to the mountain recording there. The thing was to get Chaka out of LA, so thinking she'd be on her best behavior, which she pretty much was. We weren't all that much on our best behavior, but she was pretty good. It was a wonderful experience because Arif was like so paternal in the best way. He was just so patient and inspiring. I mean, and no ego, and just about the music. And now have fun, young man, but don't, just take it easy. Leave some for coming in recording. He could see when one of us was a little green from the night before, hanging out too late, But it was a pretty relaxed bunch of sessions living there in Switzerland, and in this picturesque, right on the lake.
Would it be common for you to get hired or brought in for a particular purpose? Say it was a horn or a keyboard, and then maybe along the way they would find out you had some other kind of capability, and you would add something else?
I wouldn't necessarily say common, but it did happen more than a few times. When I did the Eric Clapton August record that Phil Collins produced, Greg Fillinganes was the keyboard player. Great Quincy. He was the meat and potatoes, and I say that in the best possible way. He was the Rhodes piano guy that Quincy, wanted in the rhythm section, and he did, the vast majority of Quincy stuff. After Foster had done a lot of stuff early, and other people had played piano for Quincy certainly, and did later, but Greg became his guy. Greg hired me to program synths because he wasn't too much into the programming part. He a synth. So I came in, I just brought my rig in, and Greg played my rig. And at one point, Greg says to Eric and Phil and Tom Dowd, the other producer, "Hey, Larry's a great saxophone player. Why don't you have him play solo on this? Because you said you needed a sax solo." So I go out. I guess I brought it the next day. I don't actually remember, because we were there like 10 days or something doing all the parts on that, overdubbing Greg. So I go out and play a solo. Eric loved it, and this says something about Eric Clapton. What a class guy he is. My lawyer at the time, Seawind's lawyer, was his lawyer in the U.S. happened to be, and some months later, my lawyer calls me and says, "Hey, I was in Japan, and Eric came off stage after this concert, and he said he was like really upset because they took your solo off the record. And he said he told me he wanted you to know that he preferred your solo, but Tom Dowd and I guess Phil Collins brought in Michael Brecker, and so I was replaced by Michael Brecker, which to me is like the biggest honor in the world. That's my hero, and I got to play with and know Michael a bit. Just still idolize him to this day, and I'm learning more about him. But that was my one solo outside the box on that record. Got taken off by Michael Brecker, which to me, again, is an honor. If you haven't been replaced, we've all been replaced. You know, some of my best stuff has been replaced. I don't even remember the solo, but I'll just tell you one quick story. I got a call from Gino Manelli, his people, and they said, we want you to do a solo. And I'd heard these stories about Gino being like beyond, exacting, demanding, and, pretty difficult, like, to please. And I asked the person, I said, well, am I the first guy coming in? He said, no, you're actually about 27th. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pass. Why don't you just get Michael Brecker? And that was it. They did, and they didn't use Michael either. I think he liked Ernie Watson. Ernie had done a big solo of his, and I think that's who ended up playing it. I'm not really sure, but I just said, I don't want to get into that.
Dodged a bullet.
They would have paid me, and I could have walked out, and hey, who knows? I could have played a great solo. It wasn't like, but I just said, just get the world's finest saxophone player. To this day, that's what I think of the playing of the saxophone, Michael Brecker. Stylistically, you can say there's other guys that do other things, but just he took the saxophone to the next level beyond Coltrane. For most of us players, it's inarguable, but. So usually I was hired for a specific thing, and Scott, to be honest, a lot of people didn't know that I played other instruments. They just knew me from one thing they heard on a record, and and that's okay. I didn't have to educate them. Sometimes, like I said, people wouldn't maybe take you seriously if they thought, "Oh, he's playing," but he plays good on that. He can't be very good on that instrument, because there weren't a lot of us my friend Peter Weller calls me a polymath, and I had to look it up, but someone who's a master of many, and that's what I set out to do. It's hard for me to this day to keep up with all of it. I'll be quite honest with you. I've let the clarinet go. I keep the flute and the saxophone, and my piano chops are okay. I'm not at the highest level like I was, but I'm still playing and active and recording. I'm recording a horn chart right now for Jason Sheff, who was with Chicago for 20 years, a lead singer bass player, and he's actually got some old studio guys on there. Steve Ferroni from the Chaka stuff and Quincy, and Michael
Average White
Lamardian.
Band. Yeah.
Average White Band. Michael Lamardian, who played on a lot of Al Jarreau stuff and a lot of Jackson stuff too. So, the guys of us that did it, we're kind of lifers, is the way I look at it. I mean, it's like, even though the recording business, it's hardly a business in some ways anymore, because a lot of records aren't making a lot of money these days. A lot of records aren't. So,
well, Larry,
the ones that are, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned George Duke, of course, and you kind of replaced him on the Blam record, but you also worked with George Duke quite a bit. And I know you did the Follow the Rainbow, which was great. I mean, he was in a great funk groove at that time for sure. What was it like actually working with him? I've heard nothing but just glowing things about George Duke.
I heartily concur. George was trying to remember the sequence of events. So I've been listening to George in Hawaii, the Aura Will Prevail on Bassif Records, and I'm going, how the hell does he get this synthesizer to do that? Because I got my first synthesizer, which was an ARP Odyssey, and I knew George played one. It was part of the reason I got it, because I hadn't really heard Jan Hammer yet in the Moog. The Moog thing was not quite there, and so I'm trying to get out of it what he's getting out of it. We get to LA, and I don't remember what was the first session, but it was a George record, I'm pretty sure, where he called us in to do horns. And one of the early ones was his record his Brazil record, which I won't remember the name of right now, which was just a beautiful piece of work. He went to
Brazilian Love Affair. Is that
Brazilian Love Affair? He went to Rio, and he got all the cats there, and did it and brought it up. And some of those horn parts are tremendous. He wrote, and Jerry's got a beautiful solo on there on this Breezin', Summer Breezin', I think. No, Breezin'. It's just Summer Breezin', I think, is the name of the one of them. Getting to work with George was like, I mean, I had followed his Zappa stuff closely. Everything he did is singing. The guy was the nicest guy and funny, made the strongest coffee. It's a serious groove going on. And I'm going, wow, for him to call us. I mean, it's like, Quincy is the same thing. It was like, oh, wow, we're okay. We're really able to be on that level, because you don't really know, you don't really know. You think, wow, this sounds pretty good, but I mean, this is our heroes calling us, right? I mean, I've been listening to Quincy's, Jerry and I listened to that at Indiana, to the Quincy's. I'm trying to remember the one with Walking in Space. Listen to that. We just wore that thing out. So getting to playing a Quincy record. But George, the greatest guy. And then, of course, Seawind asked him to produce us, which he did. Produced a record, our third and final record, which was just, having George produce us was like, and he let us be us. He didn't force us into any boxes and going to his house and his studio, like I'm playing piano for George Duke, on a motor record. It was very mind blowing. He came to my wedding, he and his wife Corinne. So we became good friends, I would say. And it was really, really a big loss when we lost George, because nobody like that really that lived in that space, that Parliament. I mean, here's Cannonball Adderley played piano. So he had all that stuff, all the jazz tradition. He had the gospel side. He and Al Jarreau were close, and then he had all this pop symphony stuff, which he did a symphony before he passed. I mean, the guy was. I watch him sit down and play first take on something. It's just pretty magical. It's like I aspire to that, so
I wanted to also mention, I know in the late 70s you worked with some of the Japanese jazz artists, and that was a very interesting phenomenon, I thought, around that time. And I think over the years more people have become aware of it, but just that kinship between the American jazz fusion movement and some of the Japanese artists, and some of the great music that was done then, in a lot of cases, was only released, at least for a time, in Japan.
It was really interesting. You're right on there. It's a strange. It's not strange when I look back, but somebody could do a whole sociological experiment about that. The time in 1978. So I guess we had our first Seawind record out, played on a couple of things. We got a call, I don't remember who it was through, got to our manager or whatever, to go be the backup band for a singer in Japan, Kimiko Kasai, who was the first singer who sang in English out of Japan, who sang jazz, my understanding, or at least one of the very early. And she was on a Gil Evans record, I believe, or Gil did a record of her. I don't quite know. Really lovely girl, a good singer. And the deal was 28-day tour, 27 tour dates. And on our day off, now I remember this, we all remember it. On our day off, we made a full record with Toshiko Honda, whose dad was the jazz journalist, kind of like Leonard Feather was in the 70s and 80s and 60s in LA. We made a complete record, all the tracks on rhythm section and all the horn parts. So I did about 15 hours on our day off. I remember drinking a lot of sake that night and not much and getting on the train to the next gig all through Japan. So, I mean, talk about I'm 28 in Japan, going to these cities. You know, we went to a city up north where our road manager, Blue Johnson, that had a big afro. We were walking down the street and people had only seen a black man on TV, and they came out of their houses, and all the kids wanted to touch his afro, and it's just, you can't make this stuff up. So I probably have been to Japan 60 or 70 times. People would bring me, because this is my understanding, and a Japanese person might tell me I'm crazy. I have good friends in Japan, so I think I'm not far off. Japanese people really pay attention to liner notes. And they buy records based, at least back then when there were liner notes, based on who was on there. And so in Europe too, and a lot of people in the US did, not just musicians like myself. I mean, if I saw Michael Brecker on a record, I'm buying that record. I don't care what it's on. If it's, it just make any difference what it is. I want to hear what he brought to that. And so there become a relationship there with a segment of people that knew my music, and people, the musicians, of course, wanted me on stuff and wanted our horn section, and so we did a ton of records, here and in Japan, and we toured with some Japanese. Jerry and I did a tour with some people, and what's really interesting, Scott, is when we went over there were some imitations of the best of jazz. They hadn't got their own voice at all. They were really at the imitative stage. There was one guitar player who's still great, Kazumi Watanabe, who's a master unto himself, who had his own kind of style. But everybody else was kind of a pale imitation of, they just hadn't had a generation of, they liked it, but they couldn't quite. And then within however many 10 or 15 years, it exploded to where there's, it's become an international, you can be anywhere, especially with the internet. But my take was that Japan always singled out, they wanted the best of the best, whether it was French pastries, they just get the chef at the best thing and show them how to make it, and they'd copy that, nail it, move on, and from all around the world. And their economy was booming, and they were paying the top dollar to have us over there, and so it was a real honor. I really enjoy to this day the Japanese people, and so much about their culture. It's just the politeness and the respect, and you're treated like an artist, So
I got to share with you, Larry. I was in Japan once about 10 or 15 years ago. It's hard to remember now, but that was my only time there. And I'm a big guy, and walking through Japan in Tokyo, some of the young guys would come up to me and they'd go, "Oh, so big," and they would reach out and feel my bicep and that kind of thing. Like you were saying about.
How long ago was this?
15 years ago.
Even 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm a little shocked, because in the 70s, in the late 70s, walking down the street as a white guy you'd get a lot of looks, and
well, I'm 6'3", so I was towering.
Oh yeah,
you
were towering. Well, we were towering too, and I'm 5'11". Now, with diets and stuff changing, not so much, the culmination, by the way, of it was for me, was I had a long relationship with one producer there. His name was 88. After the keys, I guess. I don't even think he was a keyboard player. He was a producer. I probably did 40 records for him, mostly in LA. And he was a big guy at Sony that just loved jazz and he just, he'd do anything and he built their latest, he's since passed, but he built their big studio complex. And he gave me a record deal. That's my only solo record. Larry Williams and Friends, The Beautiful Struggle. That's the one solo deal I did because I knew they let me do whatever I wanted, get whoever I wanted, produce it, and they paid me handsomely to do my own record. And I did a tour behind it with Pauline singing and Dave Carpenter on bass. Vinny Colaiuta, great drummer, was the drummer, but he didn't do the tour with me. He was not available. He was with Sting. He chose Sting instead of me.
What year was that record about?
That year record was about 2003, 2, somewhere in there.
Yeah, did you ever consider or think about doing other records under your name?
You know, it's an interesting question, Scott, because I have periods where I question it every day. And I don't have a huge burning desire to have my name out there with this is my music. I never have. I mean, Seawind scratched a lot of that itch for me. Was like, because I wrote some of the stuff and was involved in all of that, of course. After so many years of making my way, my life, my living, my livelihood, my career as a studio guy for hire, it's like to be, especially the last several years, where nobody's coming up and saying, here's some money to make a record. It's like the impetus for me. I've got all kinds of music here that I can play for my friends and for myself, for my benefit. I don't have to put it out into the universe with the rest of the glut of stuff to say this is me. I just don't have that huge burning desire that a lot of people do. I'm not a natural songwriter in terms of I get up every day and write a song. Stuff, it's just not been I've concentrated on being the player, the arranger. I love being the puzzle, making the puzzle work for an arrangement, like what I'm doing now for this horn project. Horn project, it's a horn section for Jason Chef. But
what one or two projects would you say that you're most proud of, and why?
Well, I think that's Chaka, What You're Going to Do for Me, because I was, except for Night in Tunisia, which is a great fucking track. That's David Foster, Ronnie Foster did the keyboards, and Herbie Hancock. And We Can Work It Out, where I did the horns. That's Greg Phongaines on synth bass. I'm playing all the other keyboards pretty much that I can remember, and all the horns is just Jerry and I. There is a couple of tracks of Brecker's on there that Aretha brought in, with Brecker Brothers and some other guys in New York, I think, on the title track, What You Gonna Do for Me. So because I got to do all of it, all the keyboards, the overdubbing of keys, the horn arrangements, and to working with Aretha, and the outcome of that, it still sounds pretty fresh to me when I listen to that record and I go, wow, that's kind of that's one of them, I would say, that people would know. I mean, there's things like where I did a horn stuff, the horn track, horn arrangement, and played in the section with for Aretha, Hold On, I'm Coming, which is just a one-off track. Or I played clarinet on The Wall, the last song on The Wall, Pink Floyd. That are just weird. I was also the first saxophone player on The Simpsons, Marge Simpson. After they did the orchestral session, I got a call to go up and replace the guy that did it that did it live. And so I don't think I lasted all that long, like months maybe, or maybe for a season. I don't really know. Danny Elfman, I worked with him, just playing a couple of Lisa bloops and blops, before it was a baritone. But as far as projects go, I mean, certainly one of the Seawind records, or maybe the first Seawind record, because that kind of put us on the map. And I guess the one other would be the Al Jarreau that has Spain on it this time. It has Spain and Alonzo are two synthesizer solos I did on the Moog, Moog and Prophet. 5 that have become quite transcribed, and musicians recognize me from that. That's sort of the other calling card on keys. There's that one, and then on saxophone, it's the Prince Sheila E. Record. It's so hard to. There's other ones that people don't even know about. I mean, I am quite proud of that Brothers Johnson. I've listened to it, that Blam record. Listened to it recently, and I think it holds up. Like you say, R&B is like, I mean, what is R&B and funk? And what? How do you even define what that is? I mean, it's not really important. I don't really care about the classifications. And I'll say one other record I'm going to throw in just because of the international stuff. We've done a lot of stuff for Africa. It's for Maury Conte, who's an amazing African guy out of Mali, who plays the kora, that stringed instrument. I've been to Brazil a lot and played with Brazilian musicians and produced Ivan, Ivan Lins, Lins. He's like a Brazilian national treasure, and I've got to produce 2 records with him, with Stuart Levine, and go to Brazil. And I've been to Brazil 10 or 15 times, and recently I've gone down and played with Brazilian musicians. And so to me, that's like a real kick to get to play that music, which, is like, it's just joy. It's pure joy. And I'm learning every time I play there. The first time I went to Brazil was in 1984. And CBS brought me down there, CBS Brazil, because I was working with Ronnie Foster, the great keyboard player, with a guy named Javon, who had a big hit record, and I helped Ronnie do some of the arrangements because Ronnie didn't read or write music. Great keyboard player with George Benson and many others. Ronnie Foster, great funk. Stevie, played with Stevie for years. Stevie Wonder. So I had this hookup, and I go down and I work with all Brazilian musicians. Some of them don't speak very good English, and I did all the arrangements, the keyboards, the string arrangements, the horn arrangements in about 12 days because my wife was pregnant at the time. And I do an interview with a Brazilian journalist, music journalist. And his first question was, how do you deign to come down here and play with the world's greatest musicians? And I said, well, I can't really answer that. You'll have to ask them. But when I got off the plane, I went to the studio, and they were all listening to and watching a TV show of us playing with Al Jarreau and of me playing on the Al Jarreau Spain. They were listening to all the stuff we did with Quincy and Michael Jackson. So, the way I look at it is, if you want to, his point was he wanted to keep Brazilian music pure. I said, you want to keep it pure, have your museum, keep it, because musicians, we're not about purity, man. We're going to get together and fuck that shit up. We're going to do it sideways, and I take what we're learning from each other, and I've learned so much doing this record with these guys in Brazil. The power went out about every other hour, and you'd sit around and talk to each other. Bass player would show up 5 hours late, and that's just Brazilian style, at the time. It's a little better now, but it was charming. It was like in another way exasperating, but it's just what a culture. It's like, yeah, everything doesn't run like the U.S. and it's beautiful. You just got to go with it.
Wow, man, you are quite a world traveler, no doubt about that.
Music's taken me all around the world several times.
A couple other projects have popped in mind that I just want to touch on before we part ways. One is Pleasure. You did some work with them. Do you recall that?
That's funny. Somebody brought that up recently. I do, because it was up at Fantasy Studios, and they brought us in to do horns, and really nice guys. And until really recently, I didn't really understand. I don't think I'd heard a lot of their stuff. I heard the tracks we played on. They did some mind-bending stuff back then. They didn't get their due at all.
Wayne Henderson protege group.
That's right. there was some horns that were added. One of the trombone players' name was Claytoven, which I love because he was the arranger. And I just remember that producer and engineer who was the son of, maybe the owner of Fantasy. He's a good engineer. Anyway, I remember thinking this is some serious funk, and these guys are great. And yeah, I heard a track recently, and I went, they were killing. I mean, that was really involved stuff, very and interesting, right? This is late 70s, right? Mid 70s.
They were bringing some rock and some jazz to it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Cameo except more out, you know, more really fine musicianship.
Yeah, part of the reason they didn't hit maybe as big as they could have was because they were a little, you know, different. But
yeah.
And then the other one was just, you know, the guys from the Crusaders. I know you worked with Styx. You mentioned Joe Sample, and you know, I had Styx on a while back. It was such an honor. I've been such a fan my whole life of the Crusaders.
Yeah.
So, you know, what can you tell us about those guys?
So, of course, like everybody, when I'm listening to the Jazz Crusaders and going, you know, these guys it's just like, it's kind of unusual. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of, I mean, it was funky as shit. And the solos are like, and then I go, wow, the guy, Wilton Felder's the bass player. And he's playing tenor like that Texas tenor tone. I mean, that Wilton had. You know, I got to know Joe early on at the Baked Potato, and Joe would hire me to come in and play synthesizer with him, or to, you know, record his MIDI or something. Or it was really an honor to play with Joe and get to know him, to play on those records. Spellbound, that's a great record. That was the first record I did at my studio. This same console was I kept all these years analog. Tommy LaPuma produced, another great producer, probably the guy I did the most records for other than Quincy. They hired us to play on the Crusaders record, Jerry and me and Kim, to be horns on their record, which is like, holy shit. I mean, it's a Crusaders record. Those guys fought like brothers. I mean, it was so fucking funny that in one sense, and they could be really exasperating too, fighting over what the groove should be like. And they're all brilliant. Styx, you know, Wilton would have a certain idea about the groove, very specific. And Joe would be, oh, Wilton, you know, and he'd drive that stutter. And I say that just so lovingly because I toured with Joe, warmed up Al Jarreau for many years and was on the road with us, you know, and I was with Al's band, and Joe would have a trio and play with, just what a pianist. I really got to learn a lot about piano and the history of jazz piano and stride piano, because Joe was into all that. I mean, it just makes me so grateful that I got to work with all these people that were heroes, you know. We met them, by the way, in Hawaii. Like so many people we ended up working with. They came there for a concert. I'll never forget it. The concert was Bill Evans' trio in front of the Crusaders. And Bill was pretty high, played his ass off, of course, which he could do high. And the Crusaders were, Larry Carlton was on guitar, and he was probably 23 or 5 or something, maybe 26, but he was young. I'm thinking, wow, these guys are funky as shit. So there were so many that came, and we warmed up Deodata, we warmed up them, Tower of Power. Heard Weather Report there. We didn't warm them up. They didn't need any warm up. Weather Report, when it was Miroslav Vitos on bass, and you know, the first incarnation of that band. Different drummer, but I mean, heroes.
Well, and you went on to work with Larry Carlton also, and Lee Ridenour.
Yeah. Well, Lee had a long association from those. baked potato days. I toured with Lee playing saxophone and keys at different times, or both. Just he knew he could get, for the price of one, he'd get me to do synths and sax solos, and he was. Yeah, you look at Lee's introduced me to, that was Dave Grusin, who was another hero of mine, who I got to tour with that and play that chair, the keys, and there's a video there that has gotten a lot of view among musicians with Lee, and the band is Abraham Laborio, Carlos Vega, the late great, Dave Grusin, me, and Lee is the core band, and it's Dave Valentine, Yvonne Linz, the singer I told you about, and Diane Shore, the other ones, and we toured with that lineup. We did JVC jazz festivals all through the U.S. mostly. Yeah, we did in Europe too. We did Nice Jazz Festival when Miles was on it. So what a kick! I mean, Dave Grusin hired me to play on his movies based on hearing me at the Baked Potato. Play a flute solo on Justice for All. In fact, the great Jerome Richardson, who was wonderful lead alto and bit of a curmudgeon, but he was not happy that a 26-year-old guy, Dave said, no, have Larry play the flute solo. He wanted to out, and he knew he'd heard me play it on a scene where the helicopter takes off and Justice for All, that movie.
The Al Pacino movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, great flick. I love that one.
Great flick.
Flick. Well, before I let you go, what are you working on right now that people should know about? And, is there anything people should look out for or have on their radar? Or
you know what? I'm always writing stuff these days with a singer, songwriter, wonderful musician named Randy Goodrum. And we actually have a record that we co-produced. It's called Randy Goodrum Red Eye. That's out on his label, and it's available everywhere. And I'll just say, we're going to be doing some more stuff. I don't know exactly when and in what form it'll take, but if on Randy's website, it'll be there. The core band of this record is Randy and I, keyboard, saxophone, all that stuff, some drum programming, and the core band is Vinnie Colaiuta, Marcus Miller, and Mike Landau, and very proud of that record. It's Randy's and mine's tunes, about half and half, maybe a little more skewed Randy, he's singing, and he's one of the great songwriters. He's had hits with everybody, with George Benson, with Al, with Anne Murray. He played piano with Mose Allison. Randy's an amazing musician. So we have a songwriting thing that's kind of effortless, and I'm real proud of those songs. So that's been a real light in my creative life for the last 7 years or so. And those are the songs that we just got tired of pitching songs to people, and Randy said, let's put it out, let's put out this record. So it's actually released in Japan under a separate deal. He got a separate deal in Japan because, again, based on the personnel, they love Randy and they love everybody I just mentioned. It's tailor-made for Japan. So, I'm on all kinds of stuff that's out in the last couple of years. Panic at the Disco, that last record, is a big horn section stuff. All the horns.
I mentioned my son before. He's into that group. Yeah.
Yeah. They were really fun, by the way. Fun and really good guys to be around. I'm doing movie stuff with certain people call for sessions, and I actually forget, like when you ask me, and after we hang up, I'll remember 5 or 6 things that are either just came out or coming out that I've played on. People send me stuff, all the time to play on their track. A lot of stuff from Norway and Sweden. There's a connection there. I got really great friends in France, and of course UK. And in fact, I use horn guys from the UK a lot now that Jerry doesn't play trumpet anymore because of his throat. And there's a new guy named Tom Walsh, trumpet player, that Jerry's kind of signed as he's the next Seawind horns guy. He's taken it and is going to take it on. Tom Walsh under Horn House. I'm not on that, but they don't need me, even though I play with them occasionally. Look for that. It's called Horn House.
Is it jazzy or what kind of?
It's funk, jazz stuff with really funny lyrics, but the horn stuff is really the key to it. There are great singers on it too. Great, and it's really well done out of UK. Horn House, highly recommended. It's just out, by the way, this week. You can find it on Spotify. So,
wow, definitely check that out. And Larry, thank you so much. Thank you,
Scott,
for all the great music through the years too, especially.
Hey, thank you, and thanks for the work you're doing, man, for highlighting this little known stuff. And thanks for sticking with me. I say no to a lot of podcasts out of hand just because I've done quite a few, a lot of them on Michael, a lot of them on Quincy, and some on, but your particular take is definitely worthy of wider recognition. So of wide recognition. Sounds like you're doing good. So thank you, Scott. Pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll let you know when it's going to air so you can share it if you like. And
please do, and I will.
I don't know if you get out and perform anymore, but if you do, I'd love to see you sometime. So
I do occasionally, not as much as I used to. We have an Al Jarreau tribute band that I think is going to be, that's the guys that were with Al the last 20 years of his life, that we made a record. By the way, that's a record I'm very proud of. It's Chris Walker, the bass player, who's singing his take on Al, and he's a magnificent singer, bass player, musician. Chris Walker, tribute to Al Jarreau. We're in this love together is the record. And
wow, if you can do him justice vocally, that's saying something.
You should listen and see. He's not imitating, but he's learned at the feet of the master, and he can sing it. He can get Al. He's the best I've ever heard. Not imitating, but so Al derived. You can't sing Al's stuff without sounding like Al if you're any good. And if you're not good, you're going to sound awful singing Al stuff, because it's not for the faint of heart. There was only one Al. By the way, I didn't get to talk about Al enough. That's the artist I worked with the most closely over 40 years. Not constantly, but like I said, the last 20 of his life. Those early records and those early tours in the 80s I did with him were playing Spain every night around Europe were just, heaven for me, because I get to play 5-minute solos, on every tune and pick up the saxophone. And Al couldn't be more encouraging. So great talking to you, Scott. Thanks again, man.
You as well. Take good care.
Okay. Bye.
So long for now. Bye.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Truth in Rhythm. A big thank you goes out to our guest as well as to you, the viewer and listener. Also, much gratitude to Pleasure for supplying the show's funky opening and closing music. As a reminder, you can always access the complete list of linked shows by episode at funkandstuff.net. I urge you to support this program and receive the extra benefits along with that by subscribing to the Funk and Stuff channel on YouTube and sharing it with funk, R&B, and jazz lovers, joining Truth and Rhythm's membership program at Patreon, submitting a donation at funkandstuff.net, buying Everything is on the One, the First Guide to Funk book at Amazon, shopping at the Funky Things store for cool merchandise at funkandstuff.net, and linking through funkandstuff.net for all of your Amazon purchases. In addition, if you're an artist or anyone seeking proven, results-oriented professional marketing, PR, writing, or editing consultation or production, check out the media services section at funkandstuff.net. Also, I encourage you to drop me a line at scottg@funkandstuff.net. I love the feedback, suggestions, guest requests, appearance and sponsorship inquiries, and just talking about my favorite subject, groove-based music. For now, and as always, this is Scott Dr. GX Goldfine saying, keep on vibing to the rhythm of the one.